Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. Somewhere over the rainbow, skies are blue, and the dream that you did to dream really do come true. Someday I wish upon a star, I'll wake up with a cloud of body. We'll travel men like lemon drop away above the chimney top, the way you find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, but fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh why can't I? Someday I wish upon a star, I'll wake up with a cloud of Bobby behind me. We'll travel melons, lemon drop, away above the chimney top, the way you find me. Somewhere birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh why can't I? Birds fly over the rainbow. Why then, oh why can't I?
Jesus gathered his followers on the mountaintop and said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, they will be called children of God. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Welcome to this celebration of life. That may seem ironic as we come to share our grief, of course, in the loss of Sue. You are gathered here today because somewhere along your journey in life, this important person made an impact, and it's important enough for you to share this time to say goodbye. But it's also time to thank God for the gift of life and love and that generous heart that she was given to share that life and love with us and many, many more. So thank you for being here today. My name is Mark Bullwinkle. I'm the senior pastor of LAUMC, and we celebrate this day in a special way as Bob and Sue were joined in marriage in this very room. It was over 50 years ago. And so the circle being completed, we come today to say that love never dies. We celebrate it with this wonderful music, the chance to be together, the sharing of our stories and our memories, certainly. And more than that, that promise that love never dies. Would you join me in a moment of prayer? Spirit of light and love, we thank you for the gift of life and love, for those moments in this time that we share with each other, and laughter and tears and accomplishments and challenges, all that makes life worth living. We think of that all today as we remember Sue's life, and we think of that as we think of Bob and family and friends who now learn to live without her. Let this moment be a time of encouragement and celebration. We ask this in the name of the God of all people. Amen. Mason, would you please come up to the lectern mic and begin our sharing today?
My Sue Bob story starts in 1960, in the fall of 1960, actually. Bob and I were living with 4 other ne'er-do-well students in a house in Redwood City. In those days, we like to tell people it was actually Atherton. One evening, when we had rented the house out for a party, we did this periodically when money was in short supply. Sue and a group of her friends came by, very likely to see if the rumors about the party house were actually true. I remember little about that evening, but I do clearly recall the bright-eyed, open-faced smile of the lovely blonde girl standing at the front door. It was the beginning of a precious 52-year friendship with Sue. No description of Sue's life, or Bob's for that matter, is complete without mention of the other. If the ability to love is one true measure of a person, and I believe it is, Sue and Bob have gold stars next to their names. We seniors know that no marriage is made whole by just one of its spouses. Sue and Bob somehow figured this out long before many of us. Early on, they learned how to care for and love one another with intention in a world where multiple marriages had become the norm. I, for one, looked to them for clues about this knowledge. It sure seemed to me that they knew unequivocally that they were bound together for the duration. So while over the 52 years of our friendship, we lived on opposite coasts for extended periods of time, our reunions always felt to me like coming home. And now my life story is filled with Sue Bob memories. There were evenings hanging out at Mac's Tea Room, which, as many of you know, was more bar than tea room. There were numerous beautifully orchestrated parties, like the hilarious Scrooge and fun-stealing gift affairs, where Sue's energy and creative spirit were so apparent. Biking vacations through exotic landscapes, followed by eagerly anticipated trips through Sue's amazing photographs, were the highlight of our travels. Then there were the spirited annual softball games and pool parties, where Sue's tender parental feelings for so many of her young friends were palpable. Food is not usually the stuff of legends, but no description of Sue's life is complete without mention of her cooking. And her sumptuous apple pies were simply amazing. Then, of course, I owe Sue a huge debt of gratitude for her thoughtful matchmaking. Sue knew I was really hurting after my wife died. Her matchmaking softened that hurt, and the hurt turned into new love. Linda and I treasure our memories of countless intimate dinner conversations with Sue and Bob where no topic was off limits. We treasure equally our visits with Sue these last few years, when as our talk diminished little by little, our friendship and love deepened. So now I look out over this room and feel with uncanny certainty Sue's smile shining back at me through your eyes. And while we will miss her terribly, Sue's kindness, her empathy for her friends, her generosity, her joy, and her laughter now belong to all of us. We loved Sue dearly, and Bob, we love you.
Thank you so much. Debbie, please come and share.
Good afternoon. What a beautiful day to celebrate the life of our dear friend, Sue Brenner. Had Sue planned this event, she certainly would have had a game for us to play, to break the ice, to get the party warmed up, and make sure it lasted a long time. I'm guessing it would be one of her favorites, like the one involving hunting for a hidden coin. Sue was a master of bringing people together, especially young people. As coach and PE teacher at Los Altos High School, she generously devoted herself to her students and their friends and their roommates, their parents, their spouses, their children, their pets, and treated us all as extended family. The year 1973 was the best of times for me, an awkward, athletic 13-year-old freshman in high school growing up in Los Altos. I was ever so lucky to discover the high school tennis team coached by Mrs. Brenner. I had heard from my older sister of Mrs. Brenner's reputation. Apparently, she held high standards and had a way of displaying her lack of patience for some freshmen in her PE classes, for a forgotten gym suit or lack of enthusiasm. But I did not have that experience. I learned quickly from my teammates that Mrs. Brenner, more fondly called Brenner or even Bren, was wonderful. We were part of her team. Sue embraced the world that young people brought to her classroom, which in her case was the tennis court. and she taught us much more than tennis. She modeled a sound work ethic and discipline balanced with camaraderie. She was organized and serious about competition while exuding a great sense of humor and fun. We took an annual trip to Carmel during the season to play against Santa Catalina. With Sue in charge, of course, it involved several components: a delicious lunch in Carmel before the match, an occasional celebrity sighting, one of Sue's areas of expertise, and typically an encounter with a stray cat or puppy that needed some extra attention, another of Sue's specialties. Other rituals with the team were the potlucks, and over the years, we too became familiar with Sue's great cooking for a crowd, her lasagna, her tossed green salads, her carrot cake, her chocolate chip cookies with double the chocolate chips. We also became familiar with Sue's other love, Bob, her partner in all things. First, we knew him as Santa Claus at the tennis team potluck. Then he became Bob, the gentle, thoughtful, cool guy who drove the ice green Porsche. Iceberg, I believe it said on the license plate. The bond between Sue and Bob was evident to my daughter as a toddler, who found it cumbersome to say Sue and Bob. Instead, she used the term Sue Bob to describe anything involving the Brenners, thus creating a perfect name for a wonderful team. Sue Bob gave so generously of their hearts and home to so many of us. Thank you so much, Bob and Sue.
Thank you. Dee?
Hi. My wife and Bob asked me to be brief, keep this to 3 to 5 minutes, and I promised them I would do that, though it upsets me that, at least from my mind, is that Sue lived too brief of a life. I first met Sue, I was a beginning teacher at Los Altos High School in 1969. And I had seen her around the campus, but had not spoken to her. And the very first day of school, I went into the teacher's lounge to have my lunch. And two older teachers, which were probably younger than I am right now, asked me kindly to leave the teacher's cafeteria and go over to the student side. So I was too embarrassed to say anything or to object. I didn't even have the courage to say, but I'm a teacher. And so I walked out into the quad, which is at the front of Los Altos High School, and a very big man followed me out and sat down beside me. And in those days, 1969, you know, had this huge afro haircut on an even bigger head. And, you know, he had a push broom for a mustache. He was one of the largest men I think I'd ever seen at that point in time. And he asked me what I was doing, and I told him I just got kicked out of the cafeteria. And so Tom said, well, I'll have lunch with you. And he started talking to me, and we became really good friends forever. We're still very, very close friends. And Sue became the third person in this little tight group of 3 people. The next day, I didn't have the courage to go back to the cafeteria, so I took my lunch and I went, my sandwich, and I went into the teacher's lounge. And a few minutes later, the door opens up and Sue walks in. And, you know, for a long time, I only thought Sue owned one set of clothing, a tennis skirt, a white top, and that was it, because that's pretty much what she wore most of the time. She asked me, what are you doing in here? Why don't you come and have lunch with us in the cafeteria? And I explained to her why I couldn't do that. So she said, that's nuts, that's crazy. Tomorrow, meet me there, we'll have lunch together. So that was the beginning of my friendship with Sue. She was really a spunky and spirited person, and I really loved her personality. She was unlike any PE female teacher I'd ever met up until that point. One, she was very pretty. Two, as I said, very spunky. And all the kids loved her. And that was something very special, how the kids flocked to Sue, paid attention to Sue, loved Sue. And of course, as a beginning teacher, I wanted that same kind of, feeling. I wanted kids to love me too, but you have to be pretty special, and Sue was just that kind of a special person. I can still see Sue walking from the back of the high school up to the front of the high school because it was an incline. I could stand up there and wait for her to go to lunch. And you could see her short bobbed hair. I think she's only had one haircut in her life. I'm not sure about that, but it was a short bobbed blonde haircut and just kind of bouncing above the crowd of kids. And she would show up and we would have our lunch together, Tom, Sue, and I, generally speaking. As I said, we became fast and furious buddies. I've heard Mac's Tea Rooms mentioned here once today, and Friday afternoons, many of us teachers would go down there, and of course Tom and Sue and I would be there. Sue was not much of a drinker, but Tom and I made up for a lot that she didn't drink. And she loved movies, and she loved music. In fact, Sue actually took me to my very first concert here in this area at Stanford. I think the band was Chicago playing. Actually, her and Bob took me. She was an extraordinarily competitive person in many ways, and Sue could beat me at badminton, at swimming, at ping pong. She could probably have wrestled me to death too if she tried. The only thing and the only time I could ever beat Sue at a game of tennis was when Bob and I partnered against her and Tom. And by the way, Tom still owes us dinner. And I could do the doubles, but I couldn't do the singles with her. And she would just hammer me hard with that ball. So my best tennis game with her is doubles, stay out of the way of playing singles with her. Sue loved movies in a way that, a real aficionado would love movies, especially at that time. And she would go to movies and she'd come back to school and she would regale me with the stories of the movies and the whole plot, and she'd, recite the lines to me, and she saved me a lot of money because I didn't have to go to movies after that. But there was one movie that really captured her attention, and that was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And she, she could recite all the lines and everything. But so Burt Bacharach, as you know, wrote this very famous song, Raindrops Keep Falling. And Sue would sing this all day long. Yeah, she'd hum it. Whether you'd be walking on a hike with her and she'd be humming, Raindrops Are Falling. It was in some ways a little annoying after a while, but I looked it up, and I took one course out of the song, and because I thought it fit Sue so well, and it kind of brought that memory back, and listening to her sing, and I can still hear her right now. But it was raindrops keep falling on my head, but that doesn't mean my eyes will soon be turning red. Crying's not for me, because I'm never going to stop the rain by complaining, because I'm free. And that was pretty much Sue. She was a free spirit. She was a lovely woman and a great spirit to be around. As I said, that Tom and Tom Jenkins and Sue and I were really close and fast friends, and Tom and I honestly had relationships. We're falling apart at the time, and Sue had this dying love for Bob. She never complained about him, always said very nice things about him. I'd always be really curious, what does he do at IBM? And Sue could never give me an answer. She would just say he goes to work every morning at IBM. I actually think I've asked Bob that question a few times in my life, and I still don't know what he did at IBM. So I'm going to close here with just a few more remarks of experiences that I had with Sue and witnessed with Sue. And so Tom and I could not make enough money as teachers, so we started a student travel company while we were teaching at Los Altos High School. It's called GeoTrek. And the first year that we went, we took, I think it was like 36 students, and Sue came along for part of that trip. And had done a tour of the Vatican, and which, you know, if you've been there, you know exactly what it's like. You're there almost all day long, and it was a very hot August day, and most of the kids that went on these trips were females. So Sue was perfect for them because they followed her everywhere, did everything that she asked them to do. So we're outside the Vatican, waiting to cross the street. I hope the minister doesn't get too upset with me on this one, but we're all standing there, and out of nowhere, this guy kind of rushes in, and he grabs Sue by the derriere. An Italian thing, I presume. But out of all the people he could have picked, he picked Sue. And lightning fast with that tennis arm swing, Sue turns around and decks him, drops him right there on the... I thought, man, this guy, he should never play the lottery. Poor guy was on the ground, and he was screaming in Italian and holding his nose, and he had blood coming out. And I laughed so hard, it took me like 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to recover. I just couldn't believe it, what Sue had done. But it was beautiful. It really was. So, Sue did one other thing that I thought was one of the most touching things I've ever experienced in my life. I had a student named Steve Scarf, and Steve he was born with a deformed hand. But his great love and his dream was to be a tennis player. But you can imagine how difficult that would be to become a competitive tennis player. So he was in my room one evening after school, and we were talking, and he told me he goes, I play tennis, but I can't serve, or I'm very limited in how I can serve. So he says, it kind of takes me out of the game. So I approached Sue one day, and I says, hey, Sue, you know Steve Scarf? And she goes, yeah, I know him. I said, well, you know, he wants to be a competitive tennis player, and he's pretty good if he doesn't have to serve, but can you help him? And she said, sure. And so I went out there on the very first day, because I was curious to see how Sue would handle this. And this boy would always put the racket under one arm, throw the ball up in the air, take the racket out, and then hit the ball, serve the ball. And Sue, in about a week and a half, taught him to keep a ball in the racket hand and throw the ball up and serve from that position, which, you know, gave him more accuracy and a few more seconds. And so it made him much more competitive. And that was his great dream. He became competitive and played on the boys' tennis team at Los Altos High School after that. And, you know, teachers, English teachers, math teachers, science teachers, you know, they get a lot of rewards, a lot of recognition from society. But PE teachers who touch kids, raise their spirits, you know, teach them how to do things that are very, very difficult to do, like Steve, they just don't get enough recognition and attention. I don't think. That's my point of view. Last two things. I have a little bit of water here. It was in our second year, and I was standing on in the front of my classroom, which was in the front of the school, my English class. And I looked up and I saw this just very vivacious, very pretty young woman riding her bicycle up the street. And Sue and I had been standing there chatting. And I said to Sue, who's that young lady there? And Sue looks at me and she says, you don't want to know. I said, come on, Sue, what's her name? So Sue says, well, her name is Kirsten Olsen. And I heard those words probably now 35 years ago. No, more than that, probably 41 years ago, actually. And that young woman became my wife. We have 3 sons, and it was Sue's voice that gave me her name, that gave me the courage to approach what became my wife, Kirsten. So I'll always love Sue for that very special, special introduction. And then the last one. Bob called Tom and myself about 1.5 years ago, and he said, maybe a little over a year ago, and said, you know, Sue's not doing well, she's fading. If you want to see her, you should come now. So Tom drove down from Sonoma, we went over to Sue and Bob's, and we fixed dinner, and you know, and Sue was a wee bit coherent and moved around pretty well. Her physicality was all there, but her mind was slipping in and out, obviously. And after dinner, Bob turned on music, and we were all joking and laughing and playing and dancing, and I was dancing with Sue. And I wasn't sure that Sue knew who I was. And so as I'm holding her in my arms dancing, she looks up at me and says, "You're Dee. You're Dee, aren't you?" And it was the most wonderful thing, because I thought she forgot me. So I got the last dance with Sue, and it was the most precious thing in my life. Thank you.
Smile, though your heart is aching. Smile, even though it's breaking. When there are clouds in the sky, you get by. If you smile through your fear and sorrow, smile, and maybe tomorrow you see the sun come shining through for you. Light up your face with gladness, hide every trace of sadness. Although argue, maybe ever so deep, that's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile. Smile, though your heart is aching. Smile, even though it's breaking. When there are clouds in the sky, you get by. If you smile through your fear and sorrow, smile, and maybe tomorrow you see the sun come shining through for you. Light up your face with gladness, hide every trace of sadness. Although I may be ever sorry, that's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile. If you just smile, smile.
Jeff, can you come up and share some words, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Cerise, and I'm here today because, like many of you, I have the pleasure of belonging to Sue's extended family of present and past Stanford students. I want to share with you some of the happy memories of Sue. To start with, I said extended family for two reasons. The obvious one is that Sue always treated us, her friends, as if we were indeed members of her actual family. But also, and at the heart of my feelings about Sue, I'm using the term to emphasize the energy, enthusiasm, and love with which she extended herself to all of us. In return for this, Sue never asked a thing. She simply found great pleasure and joy in making the people around her happy. It was her nature. One way Sue conspired to keep her flock happy was to corral some of us into going to silly movies with her. She would generally preview a movie to make sure it met her standards for goofiness. And she set the bar high or low, depending upon your view of these things. In any case, she knew how to pick them. She, Bob, and I sat side by side, holding our sides in stitches as we watched such classics as Dumb and Dumber, Groundhog Day, and The Big Lebowski. But I never saw Sue laugh harder than the time the three of us were watching There's Something About Mary. But Sue wasn't laughing at the movie, which she'd already seen. She was actually laughing at Bob and me. Both of us doubled over in hysterics. Not all of us in Sue's extended family knew one another, which gave her many welcome opportunities to bring folks together for the mixing and matching of personalities and interests. She often did this by inviting a dozen or so of us to the house for a dinner party. As a matter of fact, many of the friends I see here today I met at one of these affairs. I remember one dinner in particular early on that surprised me. It started out looking like it was going to be a rather formal evening. The dining table was perfectly laid out with fine linen, fancy flatware, candles, and exquisite napkins in napkin rings carved to resemble African safari animals. At first, it seemed somewhat daunting, all this finery. But it wasn't long before Sue dispelled my trepidation. As we all sat down, she promptly goaded her napkin ring lion into attacking my napkin ring elephant. The entire table erupted in laughter, and the rest of the evening proceeded in the same lighthearted way, in spite of the elegant setting. Besides giving frequent dinner parties, Sue seemed to plan her year around certain special celebrations to which she could invite her friends. She planned these events well in advance. For example, I remember one spring, we were sitting and talking in the house when she jumped up and disappeared in the closet, into a closet, and then reappeared, carrying a box. "Look what I found," she laughed. She handed me the box to open, and when I did, there inside was a fish, a rubber fish mounted on a wooden plaque. "Press the button," she urged, clearly about to burst. I did as I was told, and the fish sang, "Don't worry, be happy." Now, the fish had a hard time making itself heard over Sue's hysterical giggles. Not knowing quite what to say, I asked, "Well, where are you going to put this?" "Put this," she teased. "This is for the Christmas fun stealing gifts party." "But that's 8 months away, Sue," I said. "Yes, I know," she beamed. "I don't know if I can wait that long to see who's going to get stuck with this thing." The Stealing Gifts Party was just one of the joyous celebrations that Sue and Bob organized throughout the year. I came to look forward to them as true family traditions, noting them on my calendar months in advance. Of course, there was the Brenner softball party, without which no summer was complete, with the aforementioned Sue's famous lasagna and carrot cake. Come fall, Sue and Bob held the Autumn Classic, a party built around our Thanksgiving pickup football game. And in spring, they put on a wonderful Easter feast. I'm incredibly grateful to be part of Sue's extended family, to have shared and learned from her joys, to have witnessed her celebration of life, and to have grown in the warmth of her generosity and love. All of our lives, yours and mine, are blessed for having been graced by Sue's.
Frank, there you go.
Hi, I'm Frank Brennan. I'm the former women's tennis coach at Stanford. Very honored to be able to speak today at Sue's Memorial. Met Sue, our names are very similar, so of course we met early on at Stanford in the athletic department. Matter of fact, the name caused a lot of confusion, and people would say early on, "Well, I think I met your wife." I said, "You did?" "Oh yeah, short blonde hair?" I said, "Yeah." "Real pretty?" I said, "Oh yeah." "Sue?" I said, "No, Terry." I said, "No." Got very confusing. So Sue and I quickly met and had a good laugh at this and decided that she was my first wife. So I don't know if Bob knew that, but we were first wife and husband. So it was kind of cute, and we had a sort of a special relationship all those years. She meant a lot to our program over that 25-year period that I coached at Stanford. She was just amazing. She went on all our Thanksgiving trips. Bob and Sue were part of that group, and took good care of our team. As a matter of fact, they were our perennial host family when we hosted the NCAAs here at Stanford. And we had a pretty good record here at Stanford, winning NCAAs, and not the least of it which was Bob and Sue's backyard and Sue's cooking. Sue bonded naturally with the student athletes. She was an athlete herself, as you've heard. Tennis, golf, swimming, she could do everything. And in addition, she coached. And I knew of that early on also, because after some matches, she would try to remind me of things that maybe I didn't remember about a match down on court number 6 that she was watching. And I kept thinking, that's right, she was a tennis coach, wasn't she? And I am hearing more and more now. But she was a very good player. And I didn't know her as a fellow coach. I knew her as a player, but I knew she knew her stuff. And she reminded me that she had a pretty good record at Los Altos High School. I talked to Heather Willens, who was one of my tennis players, who was very close to Bob and Sue. And I said, what did the Brenners mean to you? And she said, it was just the greatest place in the world. Going over there in their backyard, sitting around the pool. It was sort of like the TV family that you always wanted to be. you know, Ozzie and Harriet, except unlike Harriet, Sue could really cook. But it was so much fun being over there and being around that backyard. You know, you had the love of the Brenners, and you had the support, the unmitigated support, and without the drama and without the guilt, so it was kind of cool. The athletes just had the greatest time over there. Heather, I don't think Heather's here. She has a baby, and she was trying to get up, but I think she was going to have to drive, so I don't think Heather's here. But she did want me to pass on her regards to everybody. And she spent a lot of time in that backyard. I know Bob's going to miss Sue, as we all will. But, you know, if you've known Bob at all, you know he's a tough guy, and he used to jump out of airplanes for several years, and perfectly good airplanes, I might add. I don't know why he did that. But he's going to be just fine. And we all miss Sue. She was just amazing. I think it's amazing that student athletes at Stanford University, the greatest university in the world in my estimation, a lot of yours also, their fondest memory after 4 years in Palo Alto are memories of being in the backyard of Bob and Sue Brenner. And I think that's just amazing. When we all pass on, we all will at some time, you just want to be remembered by the people that you loved. And Sue and Bob are always going to have that. And I think it's just fantastic that after all the wonderful things that happened to these kids, and I've heard story after story after story, how their fondest memory and their most cherished memories are in the backyard with Bob and Sue in Los Altos. So what a fantastic tribute to both of you. Thank you.
Craig Daniels, come on up. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Greg Daniels. Bob, I'm honored to have had you ask me to speak today. It's something I had to think twice about, though. And the reason is I knew Sue'd be listening in. But even in spite of that, I decided to do it. Sue, I may fudge a bit here as we go through this process, so bear with me, because me fudging some of these stories will make them better stories, so. The memories that I have of Sue are wonderful. The memories of the stories that you've heard already, being the last person speaking, have touched me deeply. And it reminds me that each one of us had a special bond with Sue. Mine was very special. The program lists me as a cousin of Sue's. I'm not exactly her cousin. But let me explain that if I could. What I am is family to Sue, and I'll try and give you the explanation of how I became family. Seems like just yesterday, but 45 years ago, is that possible, Bob? 45 years ago, when we first met, we met at the home of Ed Tresker, whose daughter I was dating at the time. This was my first meeting of the Tresker clan, and luckily, Bob and Sue were there. Sue immediately saw how nervous I was with the event at hand. And again, luckily for me, she reached out. And Sue, that warmth and kindness at that moment instantly made me feel at home, just as it had many, many times since that. Didn't take long for Sue to realize that she wanted to find a little bit more out about me, and she did. She asked
a few questions, and pretty soon she found out I was playing baseball at the University of Arizona, and the next thing I knew, I was out on the ping pong table with her. And little did I realize that sweet woman that I had just met, along with Killshot Bob, ended up cleaning Ed Trusker's eye clock. And from that moment, I realized there were two sides to that sweet woman. And by the way, any of you out there that would raise your hand that had the same competitive experience I did, I'm sure a lot of you did. Frank, I'm sure you did at some point in time also. Our friendship started then, but it continued, and it continued through 3 sons who are all here today, through the addition of my wife, Sue, and 11 grandchildren. What I truly am most thankful for in my relationship with Sue is the gift she gave all of them. Each one of them were given very, very special gifts. To my sons, she gave what you've heard many times, a warmth and a home that she and Bob had that she shared openly. Sue's approach to each one of them was very special. She and Lou, their grandmother, taught them how to swim in their pool, which, by the way, transpired on to our sons having their sons learn to swim in Sue's pool. Josh and Logan were and have been San Francisco residents, and Sue and Bob opened their home to them. And Bob opened his heart, and Sue opened her heart to them. And over time, they became really aunt and uncle. Sue's warmth gave the ability for Bob to become Reverend Bob for Josh and Lori, presided at their wedding. And I know, Bob, Sue had a big part of convincing you to take that step. Logan experienced the same thing in San Francisco. It seems like a lifelong residence now. It's been almost 15 years. And along with Lindsay, who has been fortunate enough to share Bob's and Sue's wonderful warmthness. The only sadness I have is that Sue was not able to have met Hadley, Logan, Lindsay's daughter, who had just arrived in October. And then my youngest son has a very, very close affinity to Sue and Bob. I remember asking Sue if I could use her name to name him. Not Sue, Brenner. And to this day, he carries her name. And by the way, Sue, you remember, his godmother. Today is, by the way, Brenner's son's birthday, Kellen. And I'm sure Sue is looking down on you. And the other wonderful gift Sue gave to me is the gift she gave to my wife, which is their friendship. And they had a very long, enduring friendship. And I think to this day, the enjoyment that I get out of the ability of look back on all those wonderful things Sue did, of the gifts she gave, still touches my heart the most. You're my hero, Sue, for the way I remember you battling the things that you had to deal with in your health, but at the same time, determining that nothing would get in the way of letting you lead your life with the same attitude and smile you always had on your face throughout the earlier part of your life. I do know you're up there listening, and I want you to know that I will be eternally grateful that my family and I have had the blessing of being able to have you in our lives. We will miss you, but we will always keep a very close place in our heart for you. I love you, Sue. Thank you.
Sue was born in Redlands, California on May 9th, 1937, to Rose Daniels and Ralph Best, and she had an older brother, Bob. They lived in a clapboard ranch house on an orange grove at the edge of town. Her Uncle Stem, Aunt Velma, and Cousin Don lived in another house on the property, and they had a stable full of horses. Sue would often crawl into the hayloft to try and make friends with the feral cats and the endless litter of kittens that would seek refuge up there. Her love of animals was an early theme that would be repeated throughout her life. The pool and badminton court on the ranch would be the source of summer family fun and the setting for many parties for Sue's grade school and high school friends. Brother Bob was quite an accomplished swimmer in his youth, and that continues to this day as he's still collecting trophies and setting national master swim records in his 80s. After Sue graduated from Redlands University, she moved up to Palo Alto and taught PE at Cubberly High School. She met Bob when she and some of her roommates went to a party at the house where Bob lived with some of his college friends. They began spending more and more time together doing fun things like skiing and backpacking in the Sierras, water skiing at Lake Berryessa, just generally partying with friends. Their friendship blossomed into love, and they were married at a beautiful Los Altos church on a gorgeous spring day, April 28th, 1963. After living briefly in Milwaukee, we moved back to California, and Sue started teaching at Los Altos High School. This was before Title IX, so girls' sports were primarily intramural, but there were girls' athletic banquets and team social events to add to the camaraderie and enjoyment of participating in sports. Sue also enjoyed social events with other teachers and organized student-teacher volleyball tournaments and student-teacher-parent tennis matches. Even after Title IX, when the girls began competing against other schools, the funding for women's sports was pretty sparse, so the girls had lots of fundraisers and even made their own uniforms. Over the years, Los Altos girls' teams did very well in the league and had quite a few individual and team championships. Sue also accompanied a tennis team from Northern California to a national tournament on the East Coast where they got to the semifinals. She tended to intimidate new students, but many grew to like her as an older sister, and they showed their appreciation by helping to pay for a trip to Hawaii. They also named the tennis courts in her honor, although the district ensured that that didn't last long. Toward the end of her teaching days at Los Altos High, Sue also coached the boys' tennis team, and she really enjoyed the challenge of dealing with surging testosterone. In 1980, I got the opportunity to work on the East Coast, but Sue was very hesitant to move because she was having so much fun at Los Altos High. The Thurlows, Steve being a California transplant, lived in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, and they convinced Sue that she would love it back there, and she did. We found an old gardener's cottage on an estate in the backcountry of Greenwich, and there were a number of horse properties out there as well. Sue coached the boys' tennis team at Greenwich High School, and they were finalists in the Connecticut State Championship. She also played on the Greenwich Town team, and they were Fairfield County champions both years that she played. But Sue really enjoyed exploring the back roads of the area and loved each of the seasons for their own particular charm. We also traveled throughout the Northeast, from Washington, D.C. in the Pennsylvania countryside up to Boston, Maine, and the outer islands like Nantucket. The Hamptons were a quick weekend getaway, but she really enjoyed exploring New York City. At the end of our 2 years, Sue was as reluctant to leave as she had been to move there in the first place. Our friends gave us a going away party that captured all of the joy of our 2-year adventure back there. One of the things we brought back from Greenwich was what Sue liked to call the Scrooge Party. We reenacted the Dickens play A Christmas Carol, and everyone at the party played a character in the production. Some of the people really got into the particular character that they were given and creatively dressed the part. Those that weren't on stage in a specific scene were part of the audience, but many of them were either heckling or studying their parts for when they would appear in the spotlight. After the play, we would sing Christmas carols, have something to eat, and critique each other's performances. Another Christmas tradition that Sue loved was termed fun stealing gifts. The trick was to bring a white elephant gift that people really wanted and would enjoy stealing from one another. Sue would do everything she could to make sure the stealing went on as long as possible. Sue's favorite summer activity, other than tennis and swimming, was the softball party. The players ranged from the little hitters to the big hitters like Sue. She wanted the games to go on, or at least until her team was ahead. But everyone else wanted to get back to the barbecue, the pool, and the hot tub. When the weather got a little colder, it was time for a little football. After we returned to California, Sue became more and more interested in sports at Stanford. She worked on a fundraiser called the Red and White Ball, where she helped organize the student athletes to tout silent auction items. Sue subsequently co-chaired other fundraisers and became a member of both the Buck Cardinal Club Board and the Athletic Board. She received an Outstanding Achievement Award from the Stanford Associates, an organization that recognizes volunteer contribution. We really enjoyed becoming serious fans of Stanford sports teams and hosting many parties at our house. One of the highlights was the dinner and dunking of the women's volleyball team, and later watching them win their first NC2A title in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There were also lots of parties for the men's and women's tennis teams and multiple national championships at sites ranging from Palo Alto to Athens, Georgia. Trips for Stanford events were only part of the travel picture. We explored the ancient Hindu temples of Indonesia, had a magical time wandering through the rice fields and Buddhist temples in Bali, and experienced a real adventure going sea canoeing off Phuket, Thailand. Still on that side of the world, we stayed on a sheep ranch in New Zealand and threw a couple of shrimp on the Barbie in Sydney, and of course, Sue couldn't resist snuggling with a koala bear while we were there. We did a number of bike trips, one to Puglia, a little-known area on the east coast of Italy near the heel of the boot, where they had 1,000-year-old olive trees and structures called trullis, which were stone dwellings with conical roofs, built entirely without mortar. Just across the Adriatic, we sailed and biked through the Dalmatian Islands off the coast of Croatia. There weren't many cars, and this is the biggest traffic jam we encountered. On the other side of Europe, we did a hiking and biking trip through Portugal, and one of the spectacular sights was the Pina Palace in Sintra, a suburb of Lisbon. We visited France on a number of occasions and explored the north around Paris, the south through Provence and Dordogne, and the central area, especially the wine caves of Burgundy. One of the real special trips was across the Mediterranean into Morocco, from the bustling Medina in Marrakesh to the tree-climbing goats near the seaport of Essaouira, and finally to the incredible vistas of the Sahara. But I must say the most spectacular trips were to Central Africa. One trip was to Botswana with Paula and Carol, two of Sue's high school buddies. We were on the Okavango Delta, and most of the animal viewing was done from canoes, but you could still get quite close to them. On another trip, we camped out at the foot of Mount Kilimanjaro with the Macaulay family. Needless to say, we didn't dare venture out of the tent at night. We also went to the Masai Mara Reserve in Kenya. Traveling in Land Rovers, you could get quite close to the animals, and you wondered why anyone would use a telephoto lens. This is one of Sue's favorite pictures. She wanted to go over and kiss the little cub's nose. Although our adventure trips were pretty exciting, Sue really enjoyed the relaxing but fun times with friends and family, whether they were at a Southern California beach, in the mountains of Central Oregon, or back in her childhood home of Redlands. After 2007, our travels were curtailed significantly. Sue's Parkinson's and dementia took their toll on her body and mind, but her inner joy and spirit kept shining through. There's still many memories of happier times and brighter smiles. Dr. Seuss said, "Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened."
Wow. Bob, thank you so much for sharing that labor of love with us. It was a tribute for all of us, but a tribute for your love for her. Thank you. I also think we should take a moment to thank this fabulous jazz musicians here today. Just a wonderful gift of music. Thank you so much. So much. Just wonderful. And it is okay to clap in church, so that's all right. I would like to ask you, after we have a final prayer, we're going to sit and listen to another wonderful piece of music. At that time, would you allow me to escort Bob over to the reception in our Creekside Fellowship Hall? The reason being, if we start greeting everybody here, we won't get over to the party, and I don't think Sue would like that very much. So allow me to get him over there. Please come and join us in our main fellowship hall in front of the main parking lot to continue our sharing of stories and memories and laughter as we celebrate this life well lived. Please now pray with me. Oh, may the Lord support you all the day long, till the shadows lengthen and the evening comes. When the busy world is hushed, the fever of life is over, and the day's work is done. Then, in God's mercy, may God grant you safe lodging, holy rest, and peace. Amen.
Wait for Mike to get his face plugged in.
And if all the way you look at me, all is for the only one I see. Be it very, very extraordinary. He is even more than anyone that you adore can love. It's all that I can give to you. Love is more than just a game for two. Two in love can make it. Take my heart and please don't break it. Love was made for me and you. For the way you look at me, oh, it's for the only one I see. To me, it's very, very extraordinary. It's even more than anyone that you adore can love. It's all that I can give to you. Ooh, love is more than just a game for two. Love can make it. Take my heart and please don't break it. Love was made for me and you. Love was made for me and you. For me and you. Thank you. Thank you.